I used to treat money like weather, measurable, predictable, basically indifferent to my feelings. I tracked everything in neat categories: mortgage, utilities, groceries, retirement, kids' activities, like labeling boxes in a garage. If the numbers were tight, you adjusted. If you wanted something, you saved. If you were responsible, you didn't let emotion touch the spreadsheet. That's what I believed about myself, too. I was the calm one, the steady one, the guy who didn't panic. I'm 44. I work in billing operations for a large outpatient network outside Columbus, and I've spent most of my adult life translating other people's chaos into paid claims and clean ledgers. I've seen the way a single missed payment can snowball into a collection notice, and how fast pride can turn into late fees. So when I say I didn't see my own collapse coming, it's not because I was ignorant. It's because I'd been practicing denial since I was a kid. Since the first time a friend asked me for money and I chose to keep it. In 7th grade, my best friend was a boy named Tommy Rivas. He lived 2 streets over in a 1-story rental with aluminum siding that always looked dull, like it was tired of being rained on. His mom worked at a dry cleaner. His dad was mostly gone. Out of town for work, people said, which I later learned was a polite way of saying he disappeared when things got hard. Tommy wasn't a saint. He'd cheat at cards and laugh too loud in class. But he was loyal in a way that made you feel safe. If someone made fun of your shoes, he'd swing first and think later. If you forgot your lunch, he'd split his. He had this instinct to share what little he had, like he didn't trust tomorrow to be generous. One Friday, we were standing behind the gym after school. The air smelled like wet mulch and metal bleachers. Tommy kept shifting his weight, hands jammed into his hoodie pocket. "Hey," he said, not looking at me. "You got $10 I can borrow? I gotta pay for the science camp deposit. They're saying it's due Monday." I had it. My grandmother had slipped me a 20 the weekend before, folded so tight it felt like a secret. "It was supposed to be just for you," she'd said, like money could be a private space. I could have handed Tommy $10 and still had 10 left. I could have done it without even feeling it. Instead, I lied. "I don't," I said, too fast, too smooth, like I'd rehearsed being someone who didn't help. Tommy stared at me for a second, just long enough for me to know he didn't believe me, and then he nodded once. "Okay," he said, and walked away. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just moved like he'd stepped around a hole he hadn't known was there. On Monday, Tommy didn't show up for science camp signups. When the bus left a week later, his seat was empty. I remember watching the other kids bounce with excitement while I sat with a sinking feeling I couldn't name. We stayed friends after that, technically. We still rode bikes and played basketball. But something changed in the way he looked at me. Less expectation, more caution. Like he'd learned my limit. I told myself we were kids. That it was normal to be selfish at 12. That it didn't mean anything bigger. Then high school happened. We drifted. I got into honors classes. Tommy started working weekends at a tire shop. We still nodded at each other in the hallway, but we weren't the same kind of close. When I left for college, we stopped talking entirely. By the time I was 30, I'd built a life that looked like the reward for being careful. I married Erin, smart, warm, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and returned library books on time. We bought a house in a decent neighborhood. 2 kids. I contributed to my 401k from the first paycheck. I kept an emergency fund because I knew what emergencies actually cost. And every so often, usually late at night when the house was quiet, I'd remember Tommy behind the gym and feel a small, hot pinch of shame. Then I'd roll over and tell myself the past was the past. I ran into Tommy again when I was 39, at a Home Depot on the edge of town. I was in the aisle with the overpriced extension cords, staring at packaging like it held a moral answer. A guy in a work jacket pushed a cart past me, and I heard my name. "Drew." I turned, and there he was. Older, obviously, stubble, a few lines around his eyes. But it was him. Tommy Rivas. Same steady gaze. Same quick half-smile that made you feel like you'd been included in a joke. "Tommy?" I said, and my throat went tight. We did the awkward adult catch-up. "Where you live, what you do, how many kids?" He told me he'd gotten into electrical work after high school, apprenticed, then started doing subcontracting jobs. He had his own van now, his own insurance, a couple guys he paid under him. Nothing flashy, but he sounded proud. Earned proud. I asked about his mom. He said she'd moved to Florida with a cousin, chasing sun and cheaper rent, and laughed like it was normal to uproot at 60 because the numbers forced you. Then he looked at me for a moment and said, "You ever think about that $10? My face went warm. I tried to play dumb. "What?" He didn't push. He just said, "Behind the gym. Science camp." I swallowed. I was a kid. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." He handed me his number on a receipt. Literally tore a strip off and wrote it in blocky handwriting. "If you ever need anything, call," he said. People hit rough patches. Felt like kindness. It also felt like something else, like a door being offered that I hadn't earned. I took the paper and told myself I'd probably never use it. The first rough patch was slow and ordinary, which is the most dangerous kind. Started with my son, Caleb, getting sick. Not the kind of sick that looks dramatic, no ambulance, no movie scene, just persistent stomach pain that turned into specialist visits, imaging, blood work. Weeks of waiting, co-pays stacking like poker chips. Then Aaron's mother fell and broke her hip in Kentucky, and Aaron started driving down every other weekend, taking unpaid days because her job at the daycare didn't offer anything close to real leave. Gas, hotels, meals on the road. We told ourselves it was temporary. It always sounds temporary. At work, my department had a reorg. My hours stayed the same, but the bonus structure changed, and suddenly the money I counted on every spring became performance-based, which meant maybe. I tightened. I cut streaming services, stopped eating out, switched to generic brands. I felt grimly proud of it, like discipline was a type of virtue that could ward off reality. But medical bills don't care about virtue. They care about due dates. By the time we hit the fall, my emergency fund looked like it had been chewed down to the bone. And then my mistake, my first adult mistake, landed like a weight. I made a decision that felt reasonable at the time. I moved money from our savings into a short-term CD ladder, chasing a slightly better interest rate. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't crypto or day trading. It was the kind of thing people like me did to feel smart. The catch was liquidity. The early withdrawal penalties weren't devastating, but they weren't nothing either. I told Aaron it was fine because we won't need it. Then the furnace died in November. It didn't just sputter. It died. The technician came out, sighed, and showed me a cracked heat exchanger like he was presenting evidence in court. "Replace," he said. No choice. The quote was $6,800. I stared at the paper and did the math fast, then slower, then again like repeating it would change the outcome. We had $2,100 in checking. We had a mortgage due. We had Caleb's specialist bill. The CD ladder wasn't accessible without taking penalties and waiting days for processing. That night, Aaron asked, carefully, "Do we need help?" I said no. Of course I did. My pride was still expensive. I applied for a credit card with a promotional rate. Denied. I called my dad. He gave me a lecture about living within your means and said they were protecting retirement because the market was uncertain. He sounded like he was reading from a pamphlet. At 1:30 a.m., I found the Home Depot receipt in my desk drawer. Tommy's number was smudged but readable. Felt like stepping off a ledge to call him. Tommy answered like he'd been expecting it. "Drew." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark hallway where the kids' night light made a dim pool on the carpet. "I'm in trouble," I said, and hated how small my voice sounded. "How much?" he asked. I told him the furnace cost. I didn't tell him about the CDs or my father or how the word denied had started showing up in my life like a curse. There was a short pause, and then he said, "Meet me tomorrow. There's a diner off Route 23, Sam's Place." At Sam's Place, the air smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. Tommy showed up in work pants with paint stains and boots that looked heavy enough to leave dents in pavement. He slid into the booth across from me and listened while I explained in my careful, rational way, like if I sounded competent the situation would be less humiliating. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't mention the $10. He pulled an envelope out of his jacket and placed it on the table. Inside was cash, bundled neat, more than I expected. $7,000. I stared at it like it was counterfeit. You can't, I said automatically. Sure I can, he said. You can pay me back. Or you can't. But your kids shouldn't sleep in a cold house because of some stupid pride. My eyes stung. I hated that it felt like relief and shame at the same time. Like someone had pulled me out of water, but I still had to stand there dripping. Why? I asked, because I needed a reason that made sense. Tommy shrugged. Because I know what it's like when you're cornered. I took the money. I told myself it was a loan, a bridge, a temporary fix. I promised I'd pay him back within 6 months. I went home and paid the furnace company the next day. And that should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The first real twist came when I noticed our savings account had dropped in a way that didn't match my mental ledger. It was subtle at first. A few hundred missing, then 1,000, then more. I blamed myself. I assumed I'd miscalculated, forgotten a transfer, underestimated medical costs. That was my default. I'm the one who's wrong, so the system stays clean. One Saturday morning, I logged into our bank and pulled up the transaction history. I expected to see expected damage, copays, the steady drain of adulthood. Instead, I saw a pattern. Transfers out every month, sometimes twice a month, labeled with bland descriptions: INS pay, school, utilities. The amounts varied: $450, $980, $1,200, but the destination account number was the same. An account I couldn't access. It was in our bank. It was tied to Aaron's profile, not mine. I sat there with my coffee going cold, staring at the screen like it was a foreign language. When Aaron came in, hair wet from the shower, I tried to keep my voice steady. Did you open another account? She froze. A towel was wrapped around her head, and for a second she looked like a stranger wearing my wife's face. It's for something, she said. What something? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I didn't want you to worry. That sentence, so gentle, so reasonable, hit me like a slap. At first, Aaron told me it was family. Her younger brother, Mason, had gotten behind on child support, she said. His wages were being garnished. He was at risk of losing his license, which would make him lose his job, which would make everything worse. Aaron said she'd been helping him quietly, just until he got stable. You know he's stubborn, she said, eyes shiny. He wouldn't come to you. He'd be humiliated. How much have you given him? I asked. She hesitated. Not insane. I heard myself laugh, one short burst that didn't feel like humor. Aaron, how much? She looked down. A lot. Shame came first. Not hers, mine. The feeling that I had failed as a provider. That my careful structure had made my wife feel like she had to operate in secret. That my control had pushed her into side doors. Then anger followed, slow and heavy. You took money out of our savings without telling me, I said. I was going to replace it, she whispered. I swear. I thought about Tommy's envelope in my pocket a month earlier. I thought about how I'd borrowed from a man I'd once betrayed, while my own wife had been moving money behind my back. That night I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to Aaron breathe and felt like the floor under my life had shifted just an inch, enough to make everything unstable. The second twist came because I did what I always do when I'm scared. I dug. I'm not proud of it, but I pulled Aaron's credit report. I told myself it was necessary because we were married, because we shared risk, because the savings transfers proved I didn't know the full picture. The report showed 3 personal loans. Not from a bank. From a private lending outfit with a name that sounded like it had been generated by software. The balances weren't astronomical individually. $8,000, $11,500, $6,200. But together they were more than our remaining savings. Erin walked in while I was staring at the screen. Her face changed immediately. You looked at my credit, she said, not even phrased as a question. What is this? I asked, tapping the monitor. She sat down slowly, like her joints had given up. It wasn't just Mason, she said. My stomach dropped. Then what was it? Erin rubbed her forehead. I thought I found a way to fix things. That phrase, fix things, was the crack where the truth started leaking through. She told me, in pieces, about a woman at work who'd been talking about a program, about short-term returns, about paying off debt faster, about helping other families while making money. Erin said she'd started small, then reinvested, then borrowed to maximize the cycle. The words were polished, rehearsed. I could hear the pitch inside them. "It's not a scam," she said quickly, as if saying it could make it true. "It's just complicated." I stared at her and felt my calm persona slipping. "You took out loans," I said, voice flat. "To invest." "I was trying to get us ahead," she whispered, but I could already see the shape of it. A scheme dressed up as empowerment, financed with our savings. And she hadn't just done it to us. The third twist arrived in the form of a text from the bank. Fraud alert. I was at the grocery store, pushing a cart past end caps of holiday candy, when my phone buzzed. An outgoing wire transfer. $9,900. Scheduled for that afternoon. Authorized from Erin's device. I called her. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I abandoned the cart in the cereal aisle and drove to the bank with my heart pounding like I was running. At the branch, the manager spoke in a soft, practiced tone while I fought to keep my voice from breaking. She told me the wire had already been processed. The money was gone. "Wires are difficult to recall," she said, like she was apologizing for gravity. I drove home on autopilot. Erin was at the kitchen table when I walked in, phone in her hands. Her eyes were red but dry, like she'd cried earlier and run out. "They said if I didn't send it, they'd report me," she said. "Report you for what?" I asked. She flinched. "For recruiting people," she whispered. "For bringing others in. They said it would look like fraud, that I'd go to jail." I felt cold all over. "How many?" I asked. Erin's voice was barely audible. "I don't know. A few. Maybe more. I just talked about it." I pictured our neighbors, our friends, the parents at daycare pickup. People Erin hugged. People who trusted her. People who might have handed over money because she smiled and told them it was safe. The betrayal expanded outward in my mind like a stain. For a short time, there was a false sense of resolution. The program website went down. Erin's coworker stopped replying. The group chat Erin showed me became a thread of panicked messages and then silence. Erin deleted apps off her phone like they were poison. She started attending free financial counseling through a community center and came home with handouts and a look of stunned grief. I told myself, okay, the bleeding stopped. We'll rebuild. We'll sell some things, tighten up, refinance if we can. We'll get through it. Tommy checked in a couple times. Not nosy, just steady. I started paying him back in small amounts. $200 here, $150 there, because I couldn't stand the idea of owing him while my life burned. He accepted it without comment, sometimes stuffing the cash into his pocket without counting. Then the letters started. First a demand letter, then another, then a certified envelope with multiple names on it. People I recognized from our neighborhood and Erin's work. They weren't suing the platform. They were suing Erin. And me, by extension, because marital assets and joint liability don't care who clicked what. They alleged misrepresentation, promises of returns, emotional manipulation. I sat at my dining room table reading legal language and felt something inside me go very quiet. This wasn't just debt. This was public ruin. The fourth twist was mine, and it's the one I can't scrub off no matter how many showers I take in my mind. I had access at work to reimbursement adjustments and vendor credits. Not huge sums, but enough movement that a careful person could hide small amounts inside the noise. I knew the controls. I helped design some of them. I also knew we were about to lose everything. So I did something I'd always judged other people for. I started stealing. Not in a dramatic, headline-worthy way. In small, rationalized steps. I delayed posting credits. I rerouted tiny overpayments into a consulting account I created under a name that looked legitimate. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back once we settled the lawsuits, that I was protecting my kids. The first time I did it, my hands shook. The second time, they shook less. That's the terrifying part. How quickly you can get used to being someone you thought you'd never be. I didn't tell Erin. I told myself I was carrying the shame alone to spare her. But if I'm honest, part of me liked having something she couldn't accuse me of, a private version of control. Tommy started calling more often. He'd ask, "You eating?" Like I was a teenager again. Once he showed up at my house with a used space heater and helped me install it. No questions asked. He watched me move through the day like I was fragile. And I hated him a little for being kinder than I deserved. When I got caught, it wasn't cinematic. It was procedural. HR called me into a conference room with a compliance officer and a man from internal audit. There were printouts on the table, highlighted lines, dates, amounts. My small thefts lined up in a neat column, totaling far more than I wanted to admit. I tried to explain. I tried to sound like myself. But the words came out thin and pathetic. They gave me a choice that wasn't really a choice. Resign quietly, cooperate, repay what I could. If I didn't, they'd refer the case to law enforcement. "We prefer to handle these matters internally," the compliance officer said, like he was offering me a favor. I signed papers with hands that wouldn't stop sweating. I walked out with a cardboard box containing my mug, a framed photo of my kids at the zoo, and a cheap calculator I'd bought my first week on the job. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a long time, like it belonged to someone else. Then I called Tommy. "I think I'm done," I said, voice cracking. "I think I ruined everything." He didn't ask what I did. He just asked where I was. He showed up 20 minutes later in his van, parked beside me, and sat with me while I tried not to cry in front of another man like it was 1955. "You got a plan?" he asked. I laughed once, ugly. "No." He nodded like he'd expected that. "Then you come work with me," he said. "I can't fix your life, but I can keep you moving." The next morning, I was hauling conduit and crawling through dusty basements, learning to be useful in a different way. My body hurt in places I'd forgotten existed. Tommy paid me cash at the end of the day, folded and clean. Felt like survival. It also felt like being kept afloat by a debt I'd started in 7th grade. The lawsuits didn't end in a dramatic courtroom scene. They ended the way money disasters usually end. In settlements, bankruptcy filings, and quiet abandonment. We sold the house before it could be taken. We moved into a rental with thin walls and cheap carpet that trapped smells. Erin declared bankruptcy on the personal loans, but it didn't erase what she'd done to other people's trust. Neighbors stopped waving. Friends stopped texting. Invitations stopped coming. The kids noticed, even if they didn't understand. Erin and I didn't explode into a screaming divorce. We just became two exhausted people sharing a schedule. We talked about logistics, school drop-off, groceries, bills, like coworkers in a failing business. Sometimes I'd catch her staring into space, face blank, like she was replaying every conversation where she'd promised someone a better future. I kept working with Tommy. He didn't treat me like a charity case, but he also never let me pretend I was fine. He handed me gloves in winter. He made sure I had lunch. When a job paid extra, he slid me a little more and called it overtime, even when it wasn't. One night, after a long day, we sat in his van outside my rental. The parking lot lights buzzed. My hands smelled like metal shavings and insulation. I could hear someone's TV through the wall, laugh track, muffled and distant. Tommy stared through the windshield for a while and then said, almost casually, "I used to think about that science camp a lot." My chest tightened. I waited for him to finally say what he deserved to say. He continued, "I didn't go because I couldn't pay. I told people I didn't want to. I got good at pretending things were choices." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," I said. It sounded too small for the years between us. Tommy nodded once, slow. "I know," he said, "but here's the thing. I don't think you kept the $10 because you were evil. I think you kept it because you wanted to feel safe." I stared down at my hands. I thought about the CDs, the secret accounts, Erin's lies, my theft at work. I thought about how many times I'd chosen the feeling of safety over the act of decency, each time telling myself it was temporary. "I did," I admitted. "I still do." Tommy looked at me then, and there was no triumph in his face, just tired understanding. "Yeah," he said. "So do a lot of people." He started the engine and the van vibrated gently beneath us. "Get some sleep," he said. "We're up early." I walked upstairs and lay in the dark, listening to my kids breathe in the next room. The debt between Tommy and me had flipped shapes, then and now, borrower and lender, the one with need and the one with power, but it hadn't disappeared. It had just matured like interest. And the unsettling part wasn't that he'd saved me. It was that being saved didn't make me better. It just kept me alive long enough to understand exactly who I'd been and exactly who I'd become.